When I tell you that we're going to be talking about electric vehicles today, what are you thinking? You're probably thinking what I'm thinking when somebody tells me about an electric vehicle, and that's a car or a truck or an SUV, some sort of road transportation. But today we're not going to be talking about road transportation. We're going to talk about boat transportation. We're going to be talking about electric vehicles, electric motors, because we have Ben Sorkin of Flux Marine, who's here to talk about electric vehicles, but electric motors, to try and decrease the amount of pollutants that motors cause, not only in water, but in the atmosphere, and get more green. And I think this is a great thing to talk about, especially with the whole COP28 happening and all the controversy around that. There are people out there who are trying to change the game, and Ben Sorkin and his crew at Flux Marine are one of those companies who are trying to change the game. And I have a great conversation. So let's get into it. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about taking action and about companies who are taking action to try to push the envelope when it comes to doing better for the environment. And today we're going to be speaking to Ben Sorkin of Flux Marine. He is the CEO at Flux Marine Limited. And we're going to be talking to him about electric vehicles, but electric boat motors and boats. And we're going to be talking about why it's important that we're pushing this and why it's important that he's actually, looking at this and pushing this and created a company to do this and creating these motors. By the way, looks super slick. I'm going to put the link to the website so where you can see the motors. Super slick. Like you thought Teslas look good. This is like very futuristic, but tasteful. I love it. And it's really great to be able to talk to Ben because he was very transparent, very open and honest of what he was trying to do, what his crew was trying to do, what his company's trying to do. And this is not just a small shop, a small startup. This is a big thing. It's going to be huge. And, they're already starting to sell motors. They're already starting to sell boats, and it's going to be big. We're going to see this company 5 years down the road, and they're going to be changing the game for boats. And I'm excited to see it. If I could have access to a boat, this is the boat that I would be looking at, or these are the motors and boats would I be looking at, because I think it's just the wave of the future. And so it's really great to see Ben and his company doing this type of thing. And I wanted to talk to him about, why electric motors? How do you get into that? What do you follow? How do you follow that path? Especially when you're innovating, and where do you go from there? He answers all those questions and more. And I just wanted you guys to be able to hear this interview because I think it's really important. I wanted this audience to be like, this is a cool interview because we're seeing more people do innovative stuff. So without further ado, here's the interview with Ben Sorkin, Chief Executive Officer at Flux Marine Limited. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Ben, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about electric boats?
Absolutely, Andrew. Very excited to be here and chatting with you about all of it.
Awesome. I have to admit, man, doing a podcast on the ocean, although it makes sense. I don't think I've ever talked about just boats and sort of electric boats at that. So this is a first for me. So this is going to be more educational for me as well as the audience, but I am super pumped because we talk about electric vehicles on land, but we don't talk about electric vehicles in the water. And we know that, diesel and gas powered motors can be not necessarily as efficient and not necessarily as fast. So it's going to be interesting to have this conversation. So I'm super happy you reached out and said, hey, we got to talk about this. And I'm like, yes, we do. And I'm glad we're going to be able to talk about this. So we're going to talk about electric boats and sort of where the industry's at with it, why it's so important. Is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? All these kind of common questions that a lot of people will ask. So I'm super pumped to do this. But before we get into all of that, Ben, why don't you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, Andrew, thank you very much. Really excited to talk about it. I think a lot of people have followed the automotive electrification revolution, and people think it's coming to boats at some point. But oftentimes people don't realize how important it is that it does come to boats. So excited to talk about that and appreciate the fact you're interested in it and how excited you are to share that with your listeners. But as far as myself, so my name is Ben Sorkin. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO here at Flux Marine. And at Flux Marine, we're building electric marine propulsion systems. really trying to develop ground up technology to create the world's best boating experiences. By background, I grew up boating my entire life. I loved engineering. I used to work for an environmental education center when I was a kid. And so the intersection of boating and the environment have been near, dear, and truly, core to my being. And so in thinking about what type of technology can we develop to make boating more sustainable, but also a greater experience, is
Mhm.
really the core roads and the intersection on the genesis of Flux Marine.
I think that's one of the things you mentioned there that really caught my ears was, talking about the experience being better too. I think a lot of people, I have an electric vehicle, and when I talk to people about having an electric vehicle, they know why I got it. And I got it for, trying to just be better for the environment, but I really like it. Like, it's a lot of fun to drive. It's powerful. The speed is quite nice, and the ride is quite nice. And it is a fun. I have a better experience driving that car than I did the car that I had before, which was an Audi, and that is a great car. Like, it was a wonderful sports car, and but now I like feel better about myself driving an electric vehicle. I think a lot of times when we make this type of sell, and you can tell me, you can clarify this for me, is when you look at changing an engine, a lot of people, probably you get the people who are traditional and want to stay with, the traditional types of engines. But then you want people who they enjoy they have an interest in a better sort of experience with that. Um, do you find like that's really the selling point when it comes down to it? Obviously, on this podcast, we're going to talk about why it's important to have, electric motors. But do you find like the selling point really when you talk to boaters is like, oh, this is a different experience and it's kind of fun?
Absolutely, hands down. And Andrew, do you know what most people know BOAT to stand for?
What's that?
Bust out another thousand.
That's true. That's true.
And that's the ongoing joke. The other joke that people say, the best days of a boat are when you buy it and when you sell it. And realistically, while boats, represent freedom, excitement, adventure, they're oftentimes a headache. The
Yeah.
maintenance, the winterization, how expensive it is to fuel up at the gas pump. And it's also,
Hmm.
when you look at a gas station on a lake, they're not everywhere like they are in cars. You're planning on going out with your friends, with your family. You need to actively plan, decide when you're going to go
Hmm.
fill up. You need to get to the fuel station, the marina, which might be several miles away. You need to hope there's not a huge long line, and you could take up half your day boating waiting for gas. And so, realistically, there are a lot of pain points when it comes to boating. And once
Yeah.
again, I grew up boating. I love boats. I owned gas boats growing up, but we took into account, all the different pain points and how could you not just create a sustainable way to propel a boat, but how can you
Hmm.
alleviate all those pain points? And with Flux Marine, when we took this ground up technology approach, we thought about all of those pain points. How do you eliminate the need to do maintenance every winter before you put your boat away? How do you eliminate the need to go to a gas station? What if you could just plug in at your dock where you keep your boat, and every time you went to your boat, it was fully charged? How could you
Yeah.
make it more exciting, more exhilarating? And I'll tell you what, when you get in the seat of one of our boats and one of our outboards that propel, dozens of different types of boats, and you drop that throttle, it's an experience unlike any other. We recently took it to a boat show and had a couple people on the boat, and not only did they say that was the fastest accelerating boat they've ever been on, they said that was the fastest accelerating thing that they've ever been on. And so
That's awesome. I love that. Now, here's a question: is it, I know with electric cars, you get a faster acceleration. Is it the same type of principle? Like with a gas, you kind of have to get there, and it takes a number of seconds to get there. We all know the 0 to 60 or 0 to 100, how long it takes. In my electric vehicle, it's a lot shorter, and you get a lot faster, and you definitely feel it. So is it a similar sort of technology? Is that what it is?
I'd say it's definitely the same effect where you
Okay.
get a lot more instantaneous torque to get the boat up on plane, is what we say. So really, when
Gotcha.
you're in the water, you get it up on top of the water. So that instantaneous torque and acceleration is still there. I'd say where it becomes particularly challenging for boats, though, is in a boat, you're still displacing water, which is 1,000
Mhm.
times denser than air. In a
Yeah.
car, your Tesla might have 300 or 400 horsepower to accelerate. On the
Yeah.
highway, you're using less than 1/10 of that power. In a boat, you still need a tremendous amount of power to keep it going, which will
Gotcha.
eventually tail into our discussion about pollution and emissions from boats.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really interesting concept to think about too. Is that's the acceleration, but then the actual maintenance and emissions and things like that. Quick question that keeps popping into my mind. I think of my car. I come in, I need to charge it. I put in the charger. Boom. It's a plug. It goes in. No problem. Does it work the same way? You pull up to your dock, say at a cottage or wherever you're at, you just plug in your car. How safe is that? Water, electricity doesn't really mix well. What is that like?
Yeah, I mean,
What's that
it's seamless, and that's how we really designed it to be. And while, of course, there are corner cases, things like boats on moorings that are not yet super simple to electrify,
Mhm.
there are hundreds of thousands of dock slips across the US that already have power on those docks. Whether it's a lake house that has power for lights and you can simply plug into a 110,
Right.
or it's a marina on the eastern seaboard, Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, where they already have what they call shore power, which is power designed for boats to plug into and keep their auxiliary systems running. You think about the AC system,
Okay.
the refrigerators, the TVs. That way, they don't
Yeah.
have to run generators all the time. So realistically, the infrastructure's already there, and we've developed a system that can accommodate anything from 110 volt household power to 250 100 amp shore power. And so it
Wow.
truly is seamless. It's easier than tying up a third cleat. You pull in, you tie up the
That's
boat, you plug it in, and it's ready to go the next day.
perfect. That's exactly what you want, right? It makes it nice and easy, and then you can plan your trips a little easier around, probably more easier than like a gas powered. And
You truly
whereas like on land, like when you're driving a car, you got to make that plan. Like the night before, you got to charge up if you're going for a far trip or something like that. If you want to make it back on a regular charge, so but it makes it faster in uh in like at home or on your dock if you're just motoring around to water ski or whatever you want to do. Then you come back, charge up a little bit, and go back out later on. I think that's great. Let's look at the industry overall right now. Um, how new is sort of electrifying sort of the boat industry? Is this something that's cutting edge? Like is Flux Marine on that cutting edge and innovative kind of thought process?
It's old and new at the same time.
Okay.
So the first outboard motor ever created in the late 1800s was actually electric by Gustave Trouvé. So
Really?
boat motors started as electric.
Okay.
Fast forward most of the time that you and I have been alive and boats,
Yeah.
there's been an industry around it. It's predominantly gas. The only really common electric systems have been trolling motors,
Mm, mhm.
less than 1 horsepower sort of thing. In, I'd say, the last 5, 6 years, there's been a lot of excitement and attention starting to be turned towards electric boats. And you're starting to see, tens of thousands of sales of still very small motors, in the
Mhm.
sub 2 or 3 horsepower range. But
Yeah.
the industry is still really nascent as far as having boats that you can go water skiing, spend a full day on that are electric. So there are a lot of companies that are spending a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort to develop the technology to go electric, but it's still a very early industry. And there are a lot of different technical approaches to how to go
Mhm.
about making an electric system that can truly work, not just for niche applications, but be truly compelling in mass market. And so I do like to think that Flux Marine is one of the companies who is really, looking at short-term pain for long-term gain in terms of
Yeah.
investing tens of millions of dollars in the right technology. That way we can ultimately go to market with a mass market product.
Yeah, I think that's great. Because it's kind of like as much as people don't like it, but Elon Musk did the same thing, right? Took a lot of money, a lot of investing, a lot of innovation, a lot of iterations, and then finally getting it right and sort of changing the market as it is, as we see cars. Um, Pushing this sort of movement together. It seems like as the EVs get like the cars get more attention and more sales and not growing sales in the last, like, say 3 to 5 years, maybe. I don't have the numbers to support that. I'm just thinking, just
Mhm.
like what people are talking about, and you see more people that are buying them, and you see more on the road than you did before. Has that helped, sort of get people's minds into, boaters' minds into being like, oh, actually, yeah, let's go with boating. Let's try this. And like you said, it's probably smaller motors, so smaller boats, outboard motors, and so forth, and being like, oh yeah, let's give it a shot. Are you seeing more like people who have electric vehicles that are more going towards boats, or is it more like a mixed bag of people who have gas powered cars deciding to go electric boats?
Absolutely. So rewind 3 years ago to probably one of the
Okay.
first boat shows we did, showing off 100 horsepower electric outboards, which the industry really hadn't seen. The feedback was all over the place. What
Mm.
electric? Is that a blender? Can I go for more than a mile? It's like, well, yeah, you can go for probably 5 times as long as you typically take this boat for. But
Wow.
3 years ago, it was a lot of explaining and convincing. Now, a couple months ago, we were at the Annapolis boat show in Maryland, where we had two boats, and we did between two boats almost 100 miles of demo rides and sea trials.
Jeez.
And they were plugged in when they were sitting at the dock. And the feedback we kept getting that was new that we didn't have 3 years ago is a family or a couple would pass by and be with their son or their daughter, and they'd say, look, it's just like the Tesla. It just plugs in.
Mm.
And it was that continual feed. And we heard that dozens and dozens of
Yeah.
times. And so the mindset is really shifting, and people are really starting to understand. It's like, well, no, maybe you can't go 120 miles in your electric 22-foot bow rider. Then again,
Right.
the number of people that actually take a 22-foot bow rider 100 miles is less than 0.1%.
Yeah. 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 You don't really necessarily need it at that point. Usually you're just messing around and you're having fun. You're usually in one small area, right? So
Exactly. And, we get the same question about some of our smaller boats. We work with a great company. We work with Highfield. They build inflatable ribs, anything as, small as 3 meters all the way up to a 10-meter boat. But it's a nice
right.
little yacht tender. You fit a couple people on it. And people have asked us, can we take this to Block Island? Block Island from where we are is over 20 miles away, which
Okay.
includes
So good distance.
12 miles of offshore. And I've never taken a 12-foot boat 12 miles offshore.
Sure. Yeah.
It all comes
That's a little risky. Yeah.
exactly. It all comes down to use case.
Yeah.
We are firm believers in that, we are trying to electrify as many boats as possible for the right use case. And that's
Hmm.
not every use case. So we still think there's clearly a need for gas powered boats in certain
Right.
applications. But
Yeah.
for the right use case and so many use cases, electric is more than enough and doesn't require any sacrifice from the consumer.
So if we're looking at now, just to kind of give an idea of some of the things that are available, you have out. So just with regular gas powered boats, you can buy just the motor itself, like the outboard motor itself, which you can attach on to most boats. Uh, is that the same? And then you can have like an inboard motor or a motor that comes with boats as well. So are you guys just creating the motors themselves, or do you sell the motors with the boats, like different sizes?
Yeah, great question. And it kind of comes down to understanding the marine industry. When a
Yeah.
car passes by, if a Subaru drives by, you don't say, huh, that's a Subaru. I wonder what kind of engine's in there. You kind of assume
Right,
it's
right.
probably a Subaru engine. When
Yeah.
a boat passes by you on a dock, you oftentimes know the engine and who makes the engine before you even know who makes the boat. There are thousands
Yes.
of companies that build boats, literally thousands. And there are less than a dozen companies that build outboard engines or engines in any high volume. And almost at least 90% of new engines sold are that of the outboard type. And that's why we
Okay.
chose to go with the outboard development path. Because when we have
Gotcha.
thousands of companies building boats, we don't want to compete against thousands of companies. We want to be the solution and the partner to thousands of companies. And so by taking that technology stack, we're able to offer outboards directly to consumers to put on a boat to repower, because most boats
Hmm.
last longer than the outboards. we're able to sell outboards directly to these boat companies so they can sell electrified packages to their customers. And then we also work with companies like Highfield, like Scout Boats, where we can get those boats, electrify them, and then sell complete packages to the customer. That way it's a one-stop shop. So the marine industry
Gotcha.
is, it's very esoteric, but we've taken as many approaches as possible to ensure that we can have the widest reach and industry impact.
That's amazing. I'm on the website right now, and it's kind of interesting. It looks very similar to like that sleek futuristic design that you see electric vehicles have, right? That it's like the Apple of computers. You know what I mean? Where it looks slick, it looks nice. You look at it, you're like, oh, that's a cool boat. Like that's a cool motor. That's a cool boat. I really like it. Of course, the question is, this is a new product, new technology. What's the cost difference if you bought an electric motor compared to like a gas powered motor? And then, of course, state that as well as sort of the savings you would have, you know, going forward.
Yeah, all great points and questions, and definitely appreciate the veneration for how it looks. And as much as I'd like to take credit for that, we have an industrial designer who is absolute second to none.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if you look at our company history and you look at all the prototypes and all of the early market motors compared to what they are today, you can clearly tell when this industrial designer joined the team. So shout out to
There
for
you
making
go.
the motors look beautiful. Great
Awesome.
question. When it comes down to cost, one of the ways we look at electric as an option. And that's where boating becomes interesting again, where you could spec out a 22-foot boat and get the base model for maybe $75,000.
Hmm.
As soon as you start adding things, maybe you want some fishing rod holders, you want a bimini top, you want LED lights, you can literally spec that boat up to $150,000.
Hmm.
There's a huge amount that's spent on options. And so I think apples to apples, if you look at a full electric boat package versus a gas
Hmm.
boat package that we're selling, it's probably about a 20% increase versus
Okay.
gas,
Yeah.
which is not that significant when you think about it as an option. Beyond there, as you asked, you start to talk about ROI, return on investment.
Yeah.
It depends on who you are. Some of our customers own rental fleets, and a rental fleet owner, they have a P&L. They know how much every system costs them in terms of charging, maintenance, storage,
Mm.
winterization. And so for a group like that, it can be as quick as 3 years to get the payback.
Wow.
For other customers, one of the things that we really focus on is reliability and truly minimizing moving components. I'll digress for a moment here, but there was a large engine manufacturer, that sells hundreds of thousands of outboards, and within the last 5 years, one of their advertisements basically said, "Buy our motor, guaranteed to start every time."
Okay.
Imagine if you were buying a car and the salesperson said, "Listen, I promise it will start every single time." It,
Yeah.
it's will tell me something that I should really be
Yeah.
excited about.
Yeah. Isn't that supposed to happen every time?
Exactly. And while realistically, the newest motors are getting much better from gas companies, they are very
Hmm.
reliable. It's still that one weekend of a year. And how much do you value that weekend where your boat's out due to maintenance? Your boat's out
Yeah.
due to something not working. And that,
Right.
for many boaters, I mean, what's the value on the 3 weekends you have off with your family and wanting to use your boat? So it's almost impossible to measure the value on that front.
For sure. And I think, like, with electric vehicles as well, like with cars and SUVs and so forth, I find the same thing. You might pay a little bit up front, although it's getting a little better. But overall, the overall savings is, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars over the lifetime, and
Exactly.
it's upwards of that. And so even just on gas itself, and enjoyment, you're probably getting more time enjoying it than actually having to find a place to gas up and so forth, right? So,
Exactly.
um, yeah, so it's really interesting. Now, what are the what's the like? Have there been regulations, like from like government regulations on the way these motors are made? Like I'm sure they have it for gas powered vehicles in terms of, regulations for manufacturers to follow and so forth. Is it pretty much similar as like for gas powered boats as it is for electric boats, other than the actual technology?
Yeah, I would say it's still early days.
Mm.
So, the biggest regulations for marine engines so far have honestly been on the emissions front because boats
Oh, okay.
boats still don't have catalytic converters. So we can get into that in a minute because that's a
Okay.
that's a rabbit hole. But as far as marine electrification, electric propulsion systems, there's not yet been a ton of real regulation. A lot of the regulatory bodies are moving as quickly as possible to really understand what's going on. The pace of innovation at Flux Marine and at these other companies, is
Hmm.
extremely fast. And so keeping up with this pace of innovation is challenging for sure. And we're seeing a lot
Yeah.
of, individuals and from these companies like Flux Marine, like our competitors, are, spending time with these regulatory bodies, really trying to educate. So I'd say regulations are on their way. They're moving slowly. And because there still are no, high horsepower, high volume producers of electric propulsion systems, regulations are not there just yet. There's also
Okay.
the side of regulations of bodies of water, and not necessarily the manufacturing side, that are that have banned gas engines on different lakes, rivers, and reservoirs.
Oh,
And across the United States, there are over 10,000 bodies of water that have banned gas engines. And so, even just right there, there's an
yeah.
inherent market for
Yeah.
electrification.
That's really interesting. And let's talk about why they're banning gas powered engines, and let's talk about sort of the consequences of having gas powered engines from an emission standpoint, from leaks, um, all that kind of stuff. Can you just kind of we've kind of teased it a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's time to let it out of the bag here. When we talk about gas engines and gas motors, they can be quite terrible for the environment from an emission standpoint, right?
Absolutely. And, you start with just thinking about gas versus electric, and everybody talks about CO2, carbon
Mhm.
emissions, carbon dioxide. And the amount of carbon emissions that come from a boat or car is directly proportional to the number of gallons of gasoline burned. So for every gallon of gasoline burned, you release about 19.5 pounds of carbon dioxide.
Mhm.
And now you start thinking about a boat, and we kind of circle back to moving water, which is 1,000 times denser than air. How much horsepower are you continually using? It's a lot.
Yeah.
You think about
Yeah.
a 22-foot boat cruising with a family, you might be using 80, 90 horsepower for an extended period of time. When you're in, I go to a Ferrari, for example. When that Ferrari
Mhm.
is cruising on the highway, 55, 60 miles an hour, it's not even using 90 horsepower. It's using a
Right.
fraction of that. And so already there, boats are using more gasoline. Now, where things really start to get interesting to talk about are is the catalytic converter. So the
Mhm.
non-CO2 pollutants. Cars needed catalytic converters over 50 years ago because the non-CO2 pollutants were really bad. Almost no outboard engines have catalytic converters right now.
Right.
And so when you start thinking about the non-CO2 emissions, we're talking about NOx, SOx, hydrocarbons. These pollutants have global warming equivalent potentials compared to carbon dioxide of between 25 and
Yeah.
298,
Yeah.
298 times CO2. And while per gallon of gasoline burned, we're not releasing 20 pounds of something like that. But if you release 1 pound of NOx
Yeah.
and HC, it's a lot more harmful
Still
than
worse.
CO2. And in that sense, boats really do contribute an outsized amount of pollution. And that's one of the reasons that I think a lot of electric only lakes have made that kind of statement and have banned gas engines.
That's really interesting where you're starting to see that happen. I didn't know that lakes were banning that, because I didn't know how far along, the electric motors were. Um, when that type of ban happens, do you get an uproar from the boating community? Because people must be like, "Oh man, I just spent all this money on an engine." Like, are there programs to help people sort of transfer, like subsidies or anything like that, for people to buy, different motors?
Good questions, and kind of starting with the subsidy part and then turning into the reaction of
Sure.
the boating community.
Yeah.
There are very, very few subsidies at this point in time, mainly because there are not a lot of off the shelf commercial ready products. There are
Mm.
some groups that are not necessarily governments, but have started to really take a stance and help with electrification. One of those groups is the Island Institute of Maine, and they have
Hmm.
several programs where they are, in fact, offering discounts or rebates or assistance with electrifying boats. And we've done a little bit of work with them and electrified a few boats in Maine, and that's been a huge success. In
Nice.
terms of the reaction of the boating community, realistically, once again, because there are not a ton of commercial ready high horsepower solutions, the lakes that have been banning gas engines are on the smaller side. These are not huge
Mm.
lakes where you'd have your,
Right.
30-foot center console that you can no longer bring. But there still are so many lakes, and you can even go through all the blog posts of the fishing forums, and you'll find one
Yeah.
post, I had to strap 4 trolling motors to my John boat because on a
Just to
windy day
get
I
to
might not get home. And so I think the regulations and bans thus far have been tactful in terms of
Yeah.
not really restricting the boating community too much, but still creating opportunity for
Right.
electrification. And boating is such a passionate recreation that I don't see sweeping bans in the near term future unless the technology is really there at price parity and performance parity to facilitate large scale bans of gas engines, which is why I believe for a very, very, very long time, gas engines and electric motors will coexist, and we'll see some type of
Yeah.
hybridization in the future.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? It's such an established community. People have known gas powered motors for a long time. There's a competitor now around, and so it's going to slowly grow and probably quicker than you think. And as you kind of alluded to, and then just building it up to it becomes like a pretty big competitor, which will be great. And then hopefully eventually it'll be a dominant competitor and be one of the only types of motors that we'll be able to get in terms of just saving the environment and working better, as you said, better experience. I love that. Um, in terms of you guys are you guys based out of Rhode Island? Is that where you're based out of?
Yes, Rhode Island.
Based out of Rhode Island, but do you sell like where's your market? Do you sell across the US, North America, overseas? How's that work?
Yeah, I'd say the demand is from all over the world right now.
Mm,
And I think, given that it's early days, we're not yet in mass production, we've certainly focused a lot of our deliveries in the Northeast. With
okay.
every delivery we make, it's not just putting a product in someone's hands, it's a
Hmm.
learning opportunity. And
Right.
the boating industry being so unique, we place extreme emphasis on how do the customers like our product? What don't they like about it? Because it's not going to be perfect anytime
Right.
soon. And with
Right.
each bit of feedback and information, we can rapidly make changes. And we've done that over the course of, weeks where something's changed tremendously based on feedback. And so mainly focused there, kind of in a northeast where we can really iterate quickly and work with our
Yeah.
customers, not as customers, but as partners. That being said, we're starting to ship motors all over the place across the
Awesome.
US.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a couple of Flux Marine motors pop up outside of the United States in the near term
Yeah.
future. So we're
Well, I would imagine like Canada would be one that we would see soon, just because it's so close. Regulations are pretty close, I would imagine. That there's definitely a big boating community on the East Coast. If you wanted to start there, or even cottage country in Ontario is crazy. People love their boats there. One thing I forgot to ask: what's the? I mean, with the EVs on like cars and trucks, they're super quiet. Is that the same as motors like the electric motors here?
definitely much much quieter, much quieter. And
That's really interesting.
they're not absolutely silent, especially
Right.
during acceleration
Hmm.
or high
Yeah,
speeds.
that makes sense.
And you almost get a little bit of sound that's exciting as you accelerate. But up on plane, we could be having a conversation quieter than we are right now with the motor in the background.
Wow.
And at
Wow.
trolling speeds, if you want a
Yeah.
wine and cheese dinner cruise, you could be going for days and not hear anything.
You won't even notice it. That's awesome. That's awesome. So here's the thing that pops up in mind as a marine biologist. Have you heard of the sailboats that have been using motors in the Strait of Gibraltar with the orcas attacking the sailboats and everything?
Yep.
So here's one theory is that they don't like the noise of those specific motors
Hmm.
that power those boats. So I wonder, it'd be a cool experiment to do, just putting it out there to work with some scientists to say, is it the motor that they keep attacking?
Oh yeah.
Because they keep they go after the rudder, they go after all that, but the people are wondering if it's the noise of the motor
Right.
that can affect. I mean, we know, marine mammals are very sensitive to noise. The more boats in the ocean, the with gas powered motors, the harder it gets in terms of communicating amongst each other. Probably not like pleasure craft, but definitely shipping in the future and so forth.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
that would be something that'd be really interesting to see if they still attack if the orcas still attack the electric motors.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so interesting, and the interaction, the interplay between what we develop as humans and what we use, and how the natural world
Hmm.
reacts to it. And we're always excited and willing to work with scientists and different organizations to test these things together. And once again, iterate for the right
Yeah.
solution for our customers, for the planet, for the ecosystem.
This is awesome. I love this. I'm going to put the links in the show notes so that people can take a look at what the motor looks like, get more information on it, and then of course they can contact you through the website if they're interested in purchasing a motor like this. If all my Canadian listeners, if you guys want, I'd love to see this in the Canadian waters, obviously in the U.S. as well, but all over the world, really. This would be a lot of fun. This is something that is not an easy thing to get into. You're innovating, and you can constantly, like, talking about doing different iterations and things like that. That comes with a lot of frustration, I'm sure, on Flux Marine part, and a lot of investment, and a lot of experimentation. So we appreciate all the work that you guys are doing out there, and being able to bring a better and more sustainable way of enjoying boating, because that's important. We know that being on the water is important for everybody to really connect with nature, and enjoy the water, whether it's fresh water or ocean water. It doesn't matter. It's always fun. Definitely different adventures and that you can have on the water. And it'd be great to do that with an electric motor from Flux Marine. So thanks again, Ben, for coming on the podcast and talking to us about this, and about this sort of like newfound industry that's better for not only the environment, but better for our experience on the boats and on the water.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thank you so much to you, and thank you to all your listeners. We're fortunate at Flux Marine to have built up a great team, a great group of investors, a great group of customers. And, if we all work together, we are going to continue to make something that really changes an industry and creates better experiences for everybody. So thank you again.
Absolutely. You bet, man. I can't wait. We'll have to have you back on to get updates and how things are going, and sort of new innovations, and go dive deeper into the technology. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for coming on.
Anytime, Andrew. Take care.
Thank you, Ben, for joining us here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on. Thank you for being so transparent. Thank you for answering questions. Really love what you and your company at Flux Marine are doing. It's something that I feel like is important in every aspect of life, that companies are taking the initiative, taking that risk. It's a big risk to come out with something so innovative. I'm sure this is not an easy process. I'm sure it's not an easy thing to do, to be able to not only create and make and manufacture these motors and these boats, but also to market them and to get people on board. Look, we've seen some people who have a very big negative side and negative outlook on electric vehicles like cars, SUVs, and trucks. I've seen some posts in some of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of, just locally here in Burlington, Ontario, and you just see people who are just like, I want nothing to do with electric vehicles. They're not for quote unquote men. They're not manly. They're not powerful. They're not this. They're not that. And it's just it's, for me, in my experience and sort of my opinion, it's ignorant what they're saying. But again, that's who you're going up against when you talk about electric vehicles, electric motors. You're going up against people who are used to diesel and gas motors and are used to what is normal. And we know that humans are not, they do not love change. We do not love change. And so when we get change, we bark back at it. And, whether we agree with some of the arguments that are happening around just anything electric or anything renewable or anything, green, it doesn't matter. That's the will of the people. And so there's a lot of education that you have to do. There's a lot of, you have to win people over. You have to convince them that these are the things of the future and that these are going to be better later on. And we've already, like, just as Ben said, there are some lakes who are banning gas-powered, diesel-powered motors and only allowing electric motors. So we're starting to see the tides turn and to see how things are going to look up in the end. So I think that's going to be something that will be really great. I think it'll be something that I'm going to be following quite a bit, and we'll have Ben back on to talk about, where he has been going in the last, 6 months, 7 months, a year, whenever we have him back on and whenever he's able to come back on. But Ben was great. His crew was great. His PR people were wonderful, and it was just really easy to deal with. So if any of you end up getting a motor from that, I would love to hear what you think of it. Please let me know, just at How to Protect the Ocean. You can just DM me on Instagram. Love to hear from you. By the way, just like, if you like the motors and you have a motor and you're talking about it and you're talking in a positive light and you probably give them a review, I would love to hear your review. I'd love to see your review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify about this podcast, about the how to protect the ocean and what we've been doing here at How to Protect the Ocean for the last, 9, almost 10 years. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and what you think of the podcast so that when other people come across this podcast, they can see those reviews and be like, oh, this is what to expect. This is what we need to say. Okay, like, this is a podcast I need to listen to because so-and-so said that they loved it and this is what they go for. And if you have, constructive feedback, I would love to hear that as well. But if you're able to review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I would really appreciate it. It helps people understand what this podcast is about, and it just helps. And so it'd be great to have you to review it. And if you do review it, let me know. I would love to hear from you and thank you, either through a video or thank you through Instagram or whatever that might be. But I do appreciate all of you listening each and every episode. But that's it for today's episode. I'm going to put the links to Ben's company and his website and his social media so you can get access to that. And of course, you can always get access at speakupforblue.com. You can see not only my podcast, but the Beyond Jaws podcast, Fancy Scientist, Aquadocs, and more. There's a lot of podcasts out there on our network, and I would love for you to listen to those and let me know what you think. But thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.